it's my absolute privilege to introduce a friend and activist that many of you all know, and Shaneel Lal, who also, Quack, brings additional layers and intersectionalities to our discussion today. So indeed, those of the trans perspectives, those of ethnic perspectives, and those of Pacific perspectives as well, to really broaden this conversation out. So lovely to see you. There's a saying that we always say when you bump into people these days, and it's like, nice to see you in real life, because we're so used to seeing people, on social media, right? But literally, I think we can't, when we think about you, we think about social media, we think about TV presence and everything else. So I just want to, thank you for being part of our discussion today. Really, really appreciate you being here. And by the way, that was the book, one of them as well. Can we put our hands together for you before we start today's chat again? And so Shakayla read the bio. I don't even know if you submitted a bio, but Ruby too says on you from the book, Shaneel is unlike anyone else you've ever met, and talks about your book, an absolute must-read, which I've read and really related to so many moments. Can you tell us what happened for you after the release of what is meant to be, not everyone gets to write a book, but I think the fantasy of most people's kids when you write a book, it's just going to be all the way up from there. What was your experience, Shaneel?
Well, actually, publishing a book was a big deal, entirely because, you don't really think when you're born in a little small village in Fiji that you're going to make it, and then you're going to make it so quickly. So at 22, I was offered a book deal, and I kind of jumped at it, not really realizing that it was going to be a hefty task. 70,000 words in 6 months, that's a lot of writing. And so I did that, and we were anticipating that there would be some level of pushback, entirely because there's transphobia in our country, and there's racism, but we just don't see it manifest in the same way, at least for me. So me, my publicist, and the publisher, we sat down and we said, we're going to get pushback. And the reason we knew that is because my publishers had published Dame Jacinda Ardern's book. And when the book went out into stores, people went to the bookstores and turned the book around, and they called the campaign Turn Ardern. And so my publishers, in response, published Dame Ardern's face on both sides of the book. And so they were turning Ardern, but Ardern happened to be on both sides, so they just kept turning her. So when it came to me, we was thinking, what would they do? I announced my book, and within 5 hours of my announcing the book, there was a tweet saying, we should hide Shaneel's book. And they said, patriots, do your patriotic duty, hide the books. And next day, this hashtag, Conceal Shaneel, started trending on Twitter, and I was like, what is this? and I looked at it, and people were finding my books in bookstores, and truthfully, I don't know why they gave me so much importance, because the best thing they could have done for themselves is just to ignore me, and it would not have, no one would have really talked about it. But the fact that these people had actually gone to stores and hid my book and raised people and pushed my book into the bestsellers list. In fact, my book was an Auckland bestseller for 4 weeks in a row. But then they didn't quite stop there. They started going into stores and ripping my books, and started, and that's a crime. So they started hiding transphobic cards with links to their websites, so that if people were buying my book, they would be given transphobic material. That escalated to sticking stickers on my book, which were, women equals biological, and then that escalated into other things. I think for me, it kind of came to its head when there was a break into my house. And that really prompted me to get new fences, a gate, new cameras. We secured our house up as though it is secured like no other. And in response to the house break-in, we had Sean Plunkett, who started a rumor that I had actually bought 1,000 copies of my book so that I would become a bestseller. And it was crazy. I don't imagine any book has been attacked like mine has in recent history.
So this is not on my script, but how does it feel to at one moment to have this really incredible achievement, to have the story out there that is not a story that is really well told and understood by a lot of people, and then have those very threats for your safety? You just got words for that?
Well, I don't. At 23, you don't quite appreciate. Because at 23, you kind of feel invincible. I think people don't tend to appreciate how young people like myself and Quack are. and So when people criticize me, there's a juvenile thing that my brain actually wants to fire back, but I fully understand that I no longer have the luxury. I can no longer afford the luxury of firing back. I just have to shut up now. But it was difficult because I was getting attacked by the conservatives, but the progressives don't actually give me much grace.
So one of the things that I was really privileged to come to your book launch with my partner Mike, and when one of the things you write about in your book was the time when you were part of Youth Parliament in Wellington, and at that very time Kāhui College went into lockdown. But you had noted while you were in Parliament, and by the way, I just, Tane's story this morning as they were doing their thesis and then experienced homelessness. It's kind of like, I just want to acknowledge that in the room here, that people are living life, trying to do activism, trying to get a job, trying to do study, and meanwhile have to deal with all these other sorts of layers of discrimination. So here you are in your book, you're in Wellington, and you're seeing your very friends in Kāhui College, and I met some of them at your book launch when it's gone into lockdown, but the media coverage, as you noted, was only around King's College, and they were not under the same threat. And I spoke to your friends at Kāhui College and I asked them about that, and they laughed and they were just like, oh yeah, that happened to us, it's just kind of another day at the office almost. The point is that it may have been another day at the office for them, but the media coverage only really showed another slice of life and really gave the priority to them, and you noted that. And I kind of feel like in your NZ Herald column, which does have a time restriction, that is really pushed, let's get something out. Perhaps if you can explain to us what happens in terms of that NZ Herald column and the tensions between getting an issue out there, otherwise that issue might not get highlighted at all, and then how that happens, and then what happens after you do that. Because I can imagine that you get the message out there, some people are educated about it who might not have ever been educated before, but I can also imagine that some people have other views about that. So would you mind talking us through that?
See, so signing up for the Herald was a difficult decision, and entirely because I think a lot of queer people, a lot of people of colour, everyone kind of on the left, they understand the Herald to be a conservative platform, and I've always understood them to be a conservative platform as well. But for me, it was a matter of looking around and seeing absolutely no queer representation at the time that I was signing up with the Herald. And it was just before Kāhui Uenuku was actually about to come to New Zealand. And I remember that the editors at the Herald reached out to me and said, would you like to write a column inviting people to come to the protest? And that made the difference for me. I was able to write a column on the Herald, which got printed in the paper, got put on the main page, telling people to come to the protest. But there wasn't one saying you should go to Kāhui Uenuku's. And I think for me, it's those small moments that I'm not going to please absolutely everyone, but whatever I can do, I will push as far as I can push. I mean, if you look around the media right now, there's absolutely no, I think I read one newsroom, but there has been no columns calling for New Zealand government or mainstream media to call for Israel to ceasefire on Gaza. And I have been working with my editor, and my article might actually land today or tomorrow, calling for not only a ceasefire from Israel's side, but also sanctioning Israel, referring Israel to the International Criminal Court, and really recognizing the statehood of Palestine. And I've been able to do that because I was on the inside, because I knew the editors, because I had those relationships, and I've just been able to work on it for a month now. It takes time, but I'm able to do it. But if I were an outsider, I would not get that. Now, that will not be enough for everyone. Some people will actually just roll their eyes on that, and that's a valid response. I don't have anything to say to that, because it's simply a difference of opinion, and we're holding two different positions. We have different ways of doing things. And I think the least productive thing to do in that situation is just to gun for each other. As a community, we are already under a threat, a constant threat. And when we are under threat, we kind of close ranks and let people do their bit instead of kind of trying to tear each other down. Which I will say I think I have participated in the past.
Shaneel, can I just note on that? I remember as a Pacific person growing up, in the wake of the Dawn raids, and just saw the terrible racism that our communities were cast as. My parents owned a taxi company back in the early 90s, and And at that time, there was an allegation of sexual assault. Someone had alleged that against a taxi company, and my parents had started a for Pacific taxi company. But the newspapers at the time, despite no evidence at all, actually the headline was sexual assault, and the picture they showed though was the picture of my parents' taxi company. And they ran that actually for a while, and then it found out that actually wasn't their taxi company at all. You know, the reason I say that is because when Tapu Misa, a Pacific Samoa journalist, became a columnist at the Insular Herald, our community celebrated, because we knew that in that setting there was so much rife racism, and we knew that we weren't going to be able to change everything, but having someone at the table to contribute and offer a different perspective and voice really, really mattered. So I just want to acknowledge what you're doing there. I think we could, sorry.
I absolutely forgot to say that every single time a column hits the Herald's website, there will be a bunch of conservatives who are already attacking me. That's a given. That'll happen every single week, and I've just learned to live with it, right? That doesn't quite matter to me, because I'm not going to, if you're going to get to the destination and you stop to throw a stone at every barking dog, you're not going to get there on time. For those conservatives, I don't really care for. What gets really problematic is when queer folk start this thing that I call pylon, something that I, again, used to engage in when I was possibly brain dead at 17, but don't anymore. But it's just putting a negative tweet about someone and then encouraging all of your other followers to engage in it publicly and to demonize that person, never once having contacted that person directly.
So that's a good question. So sorry, I'm so sorry that I keep sharing my life, but that's just the type of person I am. Tank came up to me this morning and was like, should I share about my experience? I go, I'll just go for it, I always do, but anyway. But because this leads to this, and this is a bit of a segue. I used to be a pastor, and when I started dating my partner, I was saying to him I never wanted on social media to share about him, because I didn't want people that opposed me and communities to be nosy and look on his social media profile. He didn't believe me, and we ended up splitting up. That's a long story, but now we're back together. Anyway, so point is this. Because I had to prioritise in my life what was important in terms of the bigger kaupapa, I had to have a conversation with Mike, someone that understood me. So I'm going to say to you, in this room, is kind of like we might say, and I've listened to some of your interviews where you say your role isn't to necessarily preach the choir. So I might say that, for instance, the choir could be in this room. And I had to have that private conversation with Mike, okay, this is my purpose in life, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm not asking you to explain yourself at all, Shaneel, but if we imagine that this room is the choir, or that the rainbow community at large exists, what would be your message to them? And you've sort of shared some with us now, but would you mind just sharing more? Like in terms of your modus operandi and how we've all got a part to play, basically. Yeah.
Well, firstly, I would say that we're not a homogenous community, right? I mean, I think we tend to fall into this trap that if we are all queer, that we are all going to be for queer liberation. I personally disagree with that. The issue that I take with activism is that I find that a lot of trans people of colour have been relegated to the role of fighting for the liberation of the most privileged, but never being allowed to be liberated themselves. If you think about the most prominent TERFs in this country, they happen to be queer. They probably wouldn't use the term queer, they'd use the term gay and lesbian. And the thing that frustrates me about queer people who are racist and transphobic on behalf of the conservative status quo is that being the master's favorite dog still requires you to be on a leash and for you to have a master. And I think a lot of the time these queer people who happen to be racist and transphobic are doing it just because they realize that doing so gets them closer to power. I don't really know how to solve that, but we have to recognize that there is that dynamic, and we're not a homogenous group, we're not necessarily the choir. But equally, I think we need to be more open to the idea of disagreement. And again, I would say that when I was younger, I would honestly possibly rip it to someone if we disagreed. Now I think we need to be more open to the idea of disagreement, but also more open to the idea of having internal discussions. This again is a rather controversial thing to talk about. Well, others may think it's controversial. I don't. When the whole debacle happened with police at Pride, that conversation wasn't necessarily being held by the community. It was, I saw it play out in the media, and most of my views were formed based on the media articles that I had read. I was 17, and when you're 17, you don't necessarily have those capacities and those relationships to go and engage with those people. So what I read was on the media, and there was really no space to have those conversations with the community. Also, it just felt incredibly combative. And, well, like for a better word, adversarial. There was going to be a winner. So I think the choir really just needs to start talking to each other. Sing to each other is really the message.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I was speaking, yeah, excellent. Can we just give a hand for that? Because I think, I think one of the reasons we've put the conference on is to really gather our community in the climate where many of us, evidence-based, don't feel safe to be ourselves. And yet, as you were saying, the community itself isn't homogenous, there's many intersectionalities. But I think someone, somehow, some leadership role needs to be played in terms of all of us contributing to this, how we actually find a way to have those conversations. On that note, Shaneel, like one of the things you write about in your book is, I just want to acknowledge, as a conversion practices survivor, your contribution in terms of the legislation eventually passing. And, reading it, I think many people in this room who have done activism, or not even activism, but have just done something to stick up for someone that it can cause a bit of burnout, facing, as you're saying, criticism and sort of attacks almost from all sides.
Yeah.
What is your advice to up-and-coming activists or people that want to do something in this space, and how old are you?
23.
Well, 2 years younger than me, that's amazing. Anyway, but the point is you're still young New Zealander there, still so young, and yet, what have you learned and what can you pass on? And yet, so young, but not, I feel terrible saying that because you've just done so much. Yeah. What's your advice?
Oh God, one of the most important things I've learned is to not do it alone. And I wasn't doing it alone. I absolutely was not doing it alone. People in 2018 there were 3 petitions to ban conversion therapy in 2018. One was by Young Labour, one was by Young Green, and one was by this lady called Amanda Ashley, who we then lost later to suicide before conversion therapy was banned. So there were 3 petitions to ban conversion therapy. There was a members' bill by Labour MP Maya Liu back at the time. So work was underway. It just so happens that it was stalled at the time that I came to Youth Parliament in 2019. And that speech really just kind of blew up on social media, and my face got plastered on the movement. But there were lots of people doing it. So I think the first thing is that do it in the collective. Don't do it alone. If you do it alone, you will burn out. But the reason why I felt like I had to do it alone is because I came from, conversion therapy, right into the movement to ban conversion therapy. I really couldn't trust anyone. And I just felt like I had to do it myself. It had nothing to do with other people's capabilities or achievements. It was just that I mentally had to do it myself. Because I just had to see it through. So that was not a reflection of anyone else, but rather my mental state. So the first thing I would say is do it in the collective, don't do it alone. Second thing is, I think you briefly mentioned this, is the idea of respectability politics. Now, I am personally not an advocate for censoring yourself, but I think we as a community need to recognize that people who hold the power tend to not listen to you if you are authentically yourself. That's something that I have learned. And it's just the unfortunate reality is that respectability politics is this idea that if you are unkind, or if you just say what you really mean, and if you just don't say what you want nicely, then you will not get what you want. That's probably the worst thing. It's like, I was going to give you your human rights, but then you were not kind. just the worst thing ever. But sometimes we have to kind of stroke their egos and to get our way. That's something that I've learned, because if I knew that, I possibly would not have burnt many of my bridges. For example, an excellent example is Mark Mitchell, who I always thought was a conservative person, who is a conservative person, tough on crime. And I thought that would eventually vote against banning conversion therapy in second and third reading. The National Party voted against banning conversion therapy as first reading collectively. But then he sat on the select committee submissions and he listened to the submissions and then he voted in favor of banning conversion therapy at second and third reading. And it was just that those stories made the difference. Sometimes you got to shift people through, you just kind of have to be nice to them, and then you have to slowly, you just have to bring people along on the journey. I mean, some of these people have grown up in ultra-conservative communities and have really just become accustomed to privilege. So I should bring it to that, those like fall from grace.
Thank you. When Michael and I came to your book launch, one of the things that was so surprising to me, last question, so it's a bit of a more of a personal one, is that I was just so lovely to see you just laughing and smiling, having your friends. We had a good kiki. We talked about grind up, never used that before. Anyway, it was just amazing to have that type of conversation with someone like you. I think many of us just might view as just someone out there. How would your friends describe you? And what's the future for you, Shaneel?
Oh God, how would my friends describe? Actually, I haven't seen my friends in a very long time, entirely because I've completely got work, I've got university, just finished law school.
Congrats, by the way.
just finished law school and have been thinking about what to do with my future. I've applied for my Masters of Law. So there's a lot of things. I'm just really busy. I don't get time, a lot of time. The future itself, I'm not certain. I think I'm just not going to say anything, especially in a room full of queers who might hold me accountable to it. Yes, but truthfully, there's a part of me, and I'm quite literally objectively young because I'm 23 and I still somehow feel like life's surpassed me, but I can't do next to anything without getting criticized, you know. Just yesterday there was an article about me saying that I'm a liar, but the person who wrote that article did not at any point contact me to provide any evidence. I once wrote a comment on my friend's post, which was an inside joke, but perhaps offensive to people who didn't understand the context. That comment was a subject of a staff article. Again, the journalist had not spoken to me at all. So I'm kind of functioning at a level where I have to just live my life very, very privately because I'm fully aware the vultures are watching. I don't know where I tell myself, and you talking about the future, that at some point I will run away and disappear and just have a little quiet moment.
Last question for you. It's really weird to ask this question because as I asked it of you, and it's not a controversial question at all, I'm going to ask you who your role models are. I love there was a post you did recently, and I think you were with Kāhui Uenuku, and there was another picture you did with Mawana Manio Poto.
Yes.
And you said, my aunties love me, that's what matters to me. So two questions, last question, who are your role models? But noting as well that you're a role model, and there's a really beautiful story in your book where you're saying that in Fiji where you had seen, you know, like the way that a trans person was treated in your village, and that itself sort of gave you an example of how you might not express yourself. So anyway, that's all to say that you are a really clear, wonderful, visible example of what it means for someone to accept themselves. So I want to say that. So who do you look up to? Who are your role models? Knowing that you're also a role model to men.
You both absolutely hit the nail on the head. The aunties, Whai Marama Davidson, Whai Moana Maniapoto, Pai Kylie Quince, all of these people, and the training place at Whai Lusa War. You know, these are. I've always told myself, cross whoever you want, but the aunties. Do you know what I mean? It's the conservatives can yell as much as they want, but as soon as the aunties kind of speak to you in a stern voice, that's when you know you've gone too far. That's when you rein it in. So yeah.
Awesome. One more question. We're going to take the liberty of this. One last question, because it's really important. I want to finish on a good high note. And this is all important. There's no such thing as good and bad. But our mutual friend Hukarangi Jackson asked you a question about what do you see as positive? Like, there's so much crap going on there outside Twitter, in life in general. Like, the discourse out there, if we can call it that, is very poor. What gives you hope in this current environment?
The reason why conservatives seem like they are dominating every conversation is because they're just a small group of really, really loud people. They're just extremely loud. And I think the thing about progressives is that we normally just quietly get the work done. If you think about it, 1986, a homosexual law reform, no one really thought back then that we would get marriage equality and ban conversion therapy. And then we get civil unions, and then we get marriage equality, and then we recognize that, we recognize the right of sex workers. Before that, And then with that conversion therapy, we get self-identification. But we're making progress. We're making progress, and incremental. You know, I personally fully admire and respect this idea of transformation. But transformation is done by incremental change. And we really need to commit ourselves to that.
Awesome. Well, thanks. On that note, Shaneel, I'll finish our conversation, but also just want to acknowledge on that many of us might not ever get the platforms that you get, Shaneel, but I want to acknowledge that the way that you're using that platform, the way that you're using your voice for someone so young and someone so influential, how you are, and it's similar to what Quack is doing, turning that voice and that lens to people, to others, not using that just for yourself. So I want to acknowledge that as well, but I also just want to acknowledge in the room that many people here may not consider themselves activists, but actually the very role that you're doing, and Kāhui explained it really well in their beautiful talk yesterday, that everyone here is contributing to human rights in your own ways, no matter where you come from around the motu. So thank you to you, Shaneel, and then thank you to everyone here as well. So let's give Shaneel a hand today. And also